patterns in media discourse are interesting, to put it lightly and politically. Opinions change. Over time, a few people start changing their tune, and all of a sudden more step in line until we see a significant shift in the general consensus of a series' quality. We see it with The Legend of Zelda, Pokemon, Persona, The Elder Scrolls, various anime and manga. Basically anything, really, and as far as I can tell, these cycles are inevitable most of the time. And that means that a series that I personally think is pretty cool, Hunter multiplied by Hunter, isn't immune to that either, of course. Now, I can only draw from my personal experiences and observations, but that said, I think we can find all sorts of patterns when it comes to overriding opinions on basically all of the arcs. Greed Island was widely considered to be one of the worst, if not the worst arc in the story, but in the past couple of years there's been a pretty interesting resurgence for it, which is really cool to see. The same is true for the election arc, which actually sometimes finds itself in people's top 2 arcs for the 2011 anime these days. The Zoldyck family arc, if you consider it one, is pretty firmly rooted to the basement though, and of course, Chimera Ant is widely considered to be a masterpiece, but on any given day it's liable to be slandered to hell and back for all of the reasons you'd assume. The narrator, the pacing, people not liking the direction for Gon's character, etc. Now, if we shift to my personal feelings on the series, things have been on an upward swing for me ever since I checked it out in 2015. Upon further exploration, my appreciation for nearly every single arc has been in a constant state of increase in the years since then. However, the one arc that has basically stood still in my estimation has been Yorknew City. And that isn't to say that I like it any less than I once did, or that it's inferior in comparison to other arcs and stories, or that there isn't intricate writing to learn more from. It's always been in my top 2 arcs in the series, and it's always been one of my favorite things in anything ever. But after smacking me in the face with its brilliance, my opinion on it has always been the one constant. And that looks to be the case for a lot of others as well. I think it's fair to say that the majority really like Yorknew, and it seems like a decent amount of people have been unchanging in their love for it. The arc is moody, atmospheric, cool, abstract, and unbelievably subtly substantial, so it's very easy to like. Yet it's kind of hard to parse out exactly what makes it so resolute in the minds of people, why it strikes such a chord. Although, hey, maybe we can use Occam's razor here and simply say that the troupe are raw and that Chrollo is an awesome character, that it's great to see Kurapika in such a central role, and that the shift to an ominous tone just makes this one too delicious to not deeply enjoy. Yet, that doesn't really get to the heart of it for me, and something that I've only recently been able to articulate that's a big part of why I love Yorknew is that underneath the brooding darkness and pulsating events, the crux of it is profoundly intimate and relevant. I suppose that this is just my long-winded way of expressing that this arc has an evergreen quality to it for me that ensures that my feelings on it will likely never waver, a quality that subconsciously makes itself felt from even before the arc starts through previous establishment. Now, of course, this is coming from a self-proclaimed Chrollo fanboy, someone who loves the Spider Beyond Words as an antagonist group, and has been fascinated with them since day one. But aside from all of that, there is an emotional, thematic core to this arc that stuck its tendrils into me upon first watch and hasn't let go since. And I don't think it ever will. Yorknew is a lot of things. It can be tense and booming, extremely epic and overpowering, abstract and lyrical. But there's always been an underlying and hidden yet somehow palpable sense of melancholy throughout the whole thing. One felt in the dialogue and the tone and the visuals, one that surfaces and lets itself be known in the key moments, but one that never disappears. And at points the source of that sadness is pretty clear and front-loaded, but other times it's carried forward through subtext and feeling. If you're familiar with my thoughts on Death Note, you likely know that I've been rambling on for years about the idea that the story is essentially a lament and tragedy in the form of a pulsating thriller, with the contrast between style and message lending to a really enticing full package. And regardless of the overall ideas and endpoints being quite divergent, my feelings on Yorknew City are pretty similar thanks in no small part to this aforementioned core that's achieved through the dynamics and themes. The idea I allude to here is a simple one, that everyone deserves a chance to live their lives in a fulfilling way, and that it is a deeply sad thing when circumstances prevent that. It is not unique or groundbreaking, but it is presented so sublimely that I can't help but get swept up in all of the emotions associated with the morbid dance of sorts that occurs between the central characters.
鎖ね。なんでだろうな。
地獄に繋いでおかねばならないような連中がこの世で野放しになってるからだろう。
俺には縛られてるのはむしろお前自身のような気がするがね。
Kurapika's Nen powers are without a doubt my favorite in the story. In my opinion, they are the greatest implementation of the many different dimensions to Nen, and the most powerful demonstrator of how it can work as a storytelling tool to flesh out and characterize. It's just an ability that does everything. It indirectly teaches the audience about the important nuances of restrictions and pledges. It exposits and foreshadows in a natural way. It darkly broadens the world and slowly shrouds the story in an ominous aura through its introduction. And more than anything, it works as a pristine tool to really beautifully illustrate Kurapika's mindset and how it applies to Yorknew as a whole. Through his decision to only ever use these powers on members of the Spider, we see the true strength of Kurapika's resolve, yet at the same time, this also alludes to how potentially brittle it could be. His commitment is commendable, but in a way the one-dimensionality of these abilities speaks of the one-dimensionality of his endeavors. Is this all there is to life for Kurapika? Does he not have anything else to fall back on outside of this revenge? And even if he does he want to fall back on anything? At heart, Kurapika is one of the most deeply caring and compassionate characters that this story has to offer, and that is clear simply through his growing bonds with his friends and how much he appreciates their presence in his life. That is his nature. And yet, because he cares so much, the experience of losing his entire clan has warped his motives into being in diametric opposition to who he is. He is kind and appreciative of the little beauties in life, yet his path takes him to harrowing, dark places that cause him to betray that. But it doesn't matter, because not betraying the person he is would be betraying the Kurta to him. For Kurapika, there is no other option. He must take down the spider and retrieve the stolen eyes of his brethren to soothe their souls and restore pride to his family, to appease these ghosts. He does not stop to think about what his lost clan would have wanted for him, and instead looks towards what he views as the only course of action, no matter what that may cost. But this isn't the traditional type of misguided revenge plot, because Kurapika is absolutely self-aware of how far he is capable of straying from the person he once was. He is aware of what he is doing to himself, and he is aware that he loves his friends and wants to be with them. And I can't imagine what it must feel like to willingly destroy yourself like that from the inside out. But again, there is no choice here. The things he does make him physically sick to his stomach and disturbed beyond belief, but he does not waver. He keeps Gon, Killua, and Leorio at arm's length and doesn't involve them because he wants them safe, and unflinchingly continues down this descent. It's a deeply sad and emotional trajectory for an amazing character, and his powers are very indicative of that. Because the imagery of chains works as a way of chaining these demons down to hell, but the implication here is that these chains are also connected to him. They are a part of him, his darkness. And so in order to drag the spider down to hell, he must first situate himself there. And that's what he does. I often see fan art of Kurapika's chains stretching out of frame and reappearing as a noose tied around his own neck, and that is a brilliant way of summarizing what he does to himself.
幻影旅団は永久首だぜ。熟練のハンターでもうかつに手を出せねえ。無駄死にすることになるぜ。
死は全く怖くない。一番恐れるのはこの怒りがやがて風化してしまわないかということだ。
It's such a lonely, self-destructive journey, and the further down it we go, the more these chains speak of his deteriorating state. More than anything, this all communicates how willing he is to lose everything and spurn the chance of a happy existence of connection for this. This tormenting obligation is what his life has turned into, and yet this is not how this beautiful person should live because it is something far removed from what his soul actually yearns for. He is painfully in control of his direction and restricts himself, and yet in the end, Kurapika is an example of how awful it is to be robbed of a proper life, no matter the circumstances. These acts, the killing, the blood, the things he does to achieve his goal, it leads to the concept of transformative identities. Kurapika morphs himself, debases himself, makes himself lesser and lesser of the person he really is, while chaining himself deeper into the abyss. And you can contrast that with the troupe, who commits similar acts to a worse degree with fervor rather than disgust to find some semblance of a fulfilled purpose. The troupe do these things to gain love and value and identity, and Kurapika does them and drifts further and further from all of that. Yet, note that there is no judgment here, no sides taken. Murder is without a doubt treated as deeply wrong, but the reasons behind that murder are examined much more with a magnifying glass than a scrutinizing gaze. Kurapika's deeds are shown to be terrible and very unnatural for him, but while the crew give him their advice, it's never shown to be wrong by the story, only wrong for his well-being. And even the troupe are approached with a neutral stance here. Crollo does not defend their actions as justifiable, and sidesteps that to simply ponder why they do these things at all. As far as I can tell, nowhere in the story are these people condemned in any way I could parse out. They're just presented as another viewpoint and plotline themselves, and this is where the perspectivism in Hunter x Hunter really begins rearing its head. But aside from making the troupe feel like flesh and blood, genuine characters to learn about and invest our time in, what is the reason for that? Is there even a reason apart from that? Personally, I think it all comes back to this core melancholy, this idea of the value of a life worth living, and the sadness that results when that is robbed from someone. Now, to examine that further, if we take a look at this conflict from the other side, the simple illusion brought up by the sheer existence of the Phantom Troop's Meteor City origin tells us that the vast majority of these people have been forgotten and tossed aside. We don't know their specific histories, and we really don't need to. The point is, life has been cruel on them, and the world chose to treat their lives as inconsequential. Which obviously doesn't excuse their actions, but instead offers a wealth of interesting perspective and substance to draw from. But as opposed to simply lying down and letting that happen, they decide to fight back. Everyone deserves to have their voice heard, and when someone is trying to silence you, what do? You speak louder. You yell. You scream to the heavens for someone to hear you, for the world to take note of the fact that you exist. And this is the commonality within this band that makes them all, in essence, kindred spirits. Crollo is very much willing to cast off his own singular life, but his greatest wish is for the troupe to perpetuate and continue to enact its will on the world as an extension of himself so that he may be able to finally learn about who he is. So what it really comes down to is simply making himself heard. That doesn't excuse anything these people do, of course, and neither I nor the story attempt to do that. They're murderers and plunderers and thieves, and I'm certain that a couple of them are psychopaths who likely would have ended up this way even if they weren't silenced early on. Yet, I'm also equally certain that not all of them had this within them at the start. Not all of them would have become this way if they were given a simple chance at living. Uvo's Requiem contrasts the bloodbath with a strange sadness, not just because Chrollo mourned the loss of a part of himself, and not just because the spider had lost a brother, but also because it was the signifier that the soul who had raged and raged to make himself heard had finally been silenced, and that it would be for good this time. His legacy would be maintained and his spirit would sing through their acts, but they would never hear his voice again. His rageful and joyous roar was forever choked out here. And so, what better way to carry on his will than with a symphony? As if to say, this is Uvo. This is how he lived, and this is how he died, and there's no way in hell that the world can even attempt to ignore this. To act as this band does is the essence of life itself for them. It is the means and the end. Every murder, every theft, every massacre. They're leaving imprints and echoes. Because while this may gratify the members individually, these actions are in and of themselves a demonstration of this sacred bond, proof of their lives now being ones of value, and a celebration of the sheer fact that they are able to enact their will on the world. Simply put, it's an orchestra of life only capable of being expressed by these people atop a mountain of corpses. There's a profound intimacy to the violence and acts here that surfaces once we really conceptualize what they represent. It is horrifying and deeply wrong, but this is how they can finally be heard, which ends up being convenient for the members who relish this sort of thing, of course. The spider murder as an act of life, and Kurapika's kills only ever take him closer to death. But without cruel circumstance, would either have done this from the start? It's a question for which there is a simple answer for some troop members and for Kurapika, but it also brings into focus the idea that this narrative is in some ways a vehicle for seeing how people just attempt to live, given what their environment has led them to believe existence is. The world decided that the troop were nothing, which set them off on a path that destroyed an entire culture and led to Kurapika having nothing. This then caused him to completely turn his endeavors around and warp himself, with the chains he uses to subdue those he stakes revenge on becoming his own noose. It's a horrible cycle of neglect leading to retaliation, leading to tragedy, leading to more retaliation and back again, and the root of it is very simple. Everyone born into the world deserves a chance to live, a chance to express their true selves and be free. Of course, for a rare few, freedom is not encouraged nor deserved at all, but regardless, no one should not be given the chance to spread their wings at least a little bit before being suppressed. Everyone deserves a chance to bask in the light and be happy, to be treated as ordinary people worthy of respect and equality, no matter their circumstances and as long as they aren't hurting anyone. But the world is nowhere near accommodating enough to allow for that idealism, which caused those forgotten by it to lash out. The moment that tragedy occurred, Kurapika was robbed of not just the life he had had, but of the capability of reaching out for a new one. Or at least, that is his story so far. For as long as the troop lives, they will not stop enacting the will they grasp for themselves that society tried to wrestle from them. And as long as Kurapika lives, it seems that he will not stop until he has completed avenging the Kurta and retrieving the Scarlet Eyes, no matter where that may take him. In a way, the spider and the chain user are perfect for one another, and unless one backs down, this can really only end in one way: a mutual destruction that both parties have seemingly already braced themselves for. As brilliant of characters as these people are, as interestingly as this arc tackles Chrollo's relationship with the troupe, and as enthralling of a journey as it is in some instances, the scenes that stick with me the most are the ones of Kurapika experiencing a small moment of solace and laughter with his dear friends, of Pakunoda taking a second to playfully talk to a stray cat, of Chrollo looking beyond what is in front of him, perhaps musing upon a darkly innocent childhood where he didn't feel quite as lost as he does now, where he was able to laugh, blind at the time to how fragmented a person he was and how broken of a world this is, where he didn't feel as strongly that he was a stranger to himself. These quiet moments of respite and reflection, where we can really feel these individuals longing for a life that they seemingly cannot have, these are what make Yorknew special to me. This stretch from the series can be a lot of fun, but from another perspective, it is deeply sorrowful. There is so much packed into the details and subtext here that it would seem to require a lot of thinking to really feel all of that, but somehow Togashi manages to transmit all of this through a nearly ineffable feeling that is present throughout this entire thing. This vibe is something that I still don't know how to properly articulate in the best way, but in spite of that, I felt it for a very long time, which demonstrates how wonderfully evocative the writing in these episodes and chapters can be. I can only hope that some of you can relate to this, so I don't come off as a crazy person, but nevertheless, it's from this feel that transmits to the audience that we can gather all of the emotional context here. It's almost instinctual, and to me, this makes this something like a grim and artful work of theater that ebbs and flows and acts as a conduit for all of the highs and lows and mysteries of existence. Along with being a supreme study about identity, fate, revenge, and more, Yorknew City, an arc drenched in death, is a tragic story about life. About what people will do to feel, and about how truly sad it is that the world forces some otherwise gentle souls to feel the need to do these things to properly exist in a way that they can be satisfied with. Many thanks for watching.